Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize, I was at a markup that's supposed to last an hour and a half, and it lasted like 4 hours, so. The committee will now come to order. The committee is meeting today to hear testimony on the policy priorities of the Trump administration's fiscal year 2021 budget for the insular areas. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record as if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent for the gentle lady from the U.S. Virgin Islands, should be here, Ms. Plaskett, to sit on the dais and question the witnesses at today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. And I now recognize myself for my opening statement. Good afternoon again, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to the governors, Governor Guerrero, Governor Bryan, and Lieutenant Governor Palacios, for being here for this oversight hearing on the President's budget proposal for fiscal year 2021. I know Washington's a long way from home, and you all have to make best use of your limited time here. Obviously, you think it's important to let Congress know what your financial needs are for the coming fiscal year, because Congress appropriates the money. I want you to know that the Office of Insular Affairs was also invited to be here to explain and defend the President's budget, and they declined. And given the way they wanted to cut your funding, I can understand why they may not want to be here. So we will proceed without them. I would like to take a quick look back before we talk about the future. We made some important decisions for you in fiscal year 2020. When the governors were here a year ago, we were on the brink of a medical cliff. Your Obamacare money was running out, and the long-standing goal of state-like treatment was unfulfilled. That is all changed. You wanted a federal local Medicaid match like a state. Congress gave you an 83-17 federal local match, better than any state gets. You wanted unlimited federal money like a state. I can't say we got unlimited money, but in the case of the Marianas, for example, Congress provided $60 million. That's 9 times more than current law, exactly what the governor's office told us would cover their costs. What we did not get you is a permanent fix. Congress was ready to give you 6 years of funding. I understand that the White House is responsible for cutting that back to 2 years. It was the last item on the agenda before the President said he may consider vetoing the budget if 6 years of funding for Medicaid for Puerto Rico and the other territories are in there. So now the ball is in your court. Congress wants you to have more Medicaid money, and we're willing to give you a very generous FMAP, just what the governors are asked for. But I have to caution you, if the insular areas do not use this Medicaid money with a federal local match better than any state, then it will be very difficult for your representatives here in Congress to make the case for continuing Medicaid funding at this level beyond 2 years. Please, you're getting exactly what you asked for, so use it. Or it will be very difficult to keep this level of medical funding. I would also like to note that all the insular areas are in recovery mode. Hurricanes in the Caribbean, typhoons and cyclones in the Pacific have had a devastating impact on individuals, families, public infrastructure, and your economies. Congress has provided literally billions of dollars for the recovery. In last year's Disaster Relief Act, we set aside $129 million specifically for the Northern Marianas Youth Recovery. The Marianas is getting $249 million in CDBG-DR funds. And all the insular areas have access to recovery money from the EDA, the Agriculture Department, the Army Corps of Engineers, and other federal agencies. I want to let you know, and I think I can speak for all the insular representatives, we are tracking the money Congress appropriated for you. If you're having any problems getting that money, if agencies are slow to respond or put up any roadblocks, let us know, please. We want you back on your feet as quickly as possible. During your statements today and during questioning, there will be ample opportunity to discuss the specifics of the President's budget. And so I will now turn to the distinguished gentle lady from Puerto Rico, the ranking member, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome all the governors here. For me, it's a pleasure to have governors coming from far from the Pacific and the Caribbean to join us today. And I do know personally how difficult it is to, as a territory, fight a lot of the issues that have us together. I want to say welcome to our friend Madeline Bordalo as well, always a member and representative of Guam. And of course, our current congressman from Guam, Mr. San Nicolas, and Mr. Sablan, the governor of Northern Mariana, the lieutenant governor of Northern Mariana Islands, as well as the governor of Virgin Islands and Guam. Happy to have you here. Today, we intend to analyze the priorities and other efforts contained in the President's Fiscal Budget 2021 request for insular areas, which is $89 billion for current appropriations and $619 million with permanent funding. This represents a $19 million decrease over the fiscal year 2020. But I think it's important to establish that this budget was just presented yesterday. So in order, many of us haven't finished even reading how that will impact the whole federal access to many programs. And of course, every budget that is presented by the President during the last 3 years never has been approved as they have come to Congress. So this is the reason we want to have your input in many of those areas so we can work together. And in order to have something done, it needs to be in a bipartisan way. In that sense, the budget was released, and there's still much to review. I realize it may be somewhat difficult to comment in detail without having had more time to analyze this budget. I do, however, welcome the discussion to hear each island top priorities, and I think that's one of the most important things. As members of Congress representing the islands, we try to get some common agenda in the past, and we've been effective in doing so. The Office of Insular Affairs within the Department of Interior is responsible for carrying out responsibilities for all U.S. territories except Puerto Rico. These are American Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And in addition to providing assistance to these 4 territories, this office is charged with overseeing federal assistance under the Compact of Free Association with which the United States has signed with the 3 freely associated states, the Republic of Palau, Federal States of Micronesia, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Given the geographic location and size of the 4 small U.S. territories and the freely associated states, each one face unique challenges. These can be in the form of economic, healthcare quality, infrastructure, and many others. As we know too well in Puerto Rico, these challenges are only exacerbated by unequal treatment Americans receive in territories. Multiple federal programs such as Medicaid, Medicare, SSI, among many other programs that treat us differently. And that's the reason we all, every time can, work together to achieve equality in many areas. My hope is that we can work together to address each island priorities in an efficient way that is beneficial to both the taxpayers' money and the residents that call the U.S. territories home. With your help, Mr. Chairman, I would like to continue the committee review of the fiscal year 2021 Office of Insular Affairs budget request with the Department of Interior. Having their participation in this process will be crucial. And again, I want to say thank you and look forward to hear your testimony here. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. I know one of the issues that is not in the preview of today's hearing is the cockfighting ban, and we just talked about that before the hearing. We all face the same situation. For Puerto Rico, this is an issue of economic development because of the jobs that are created, the taxpayers, the tax revenues that are created as well. I know that you may be not prepared today to discuss that issue, but I will be more than happy to receive your comments in writing regarding those to see how we can push together, not just a federal provision of that ban. Some states, in our case, we just state legislated to try to mitigate this, but I know that will not be enough. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And so let me introduce the witnesses. We have the Honorable Albert Bryan, Jr., Governor of the United States Virgin Islands. Welcome, Governor. We have Lieutenant Governor Arnold I. Palacios, Lieutenant Governor for the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Governor, welcome. And of course, the Honorable Lou Leon Guerrero, Governor of Guam. Welcome, Governor. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of a former colleague, Ms. Bordalio, and also the presence of, if I'm not mistaken, he's back, I can see him, the former staff director for Insular Affairs under this committee, Mr. Babalta, and also the Honorable Mr. Babalta, former Assistant Secretary of Interior. Welcome. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left, and then red when time is expired. Now, after the witnesses have testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask questions. So let me start with Governor Bryan of the United States Virgin Islands. You have 5 minutes, sir. Press the button in front of you, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chairman Sablan, and members and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today to outline the priorities of the U.S. Virgin Islands and the important role of the Department of Interior's Office of Insular Affairs in helping us achieve our goals. The timing of this hearing is fortuitous as we recover from the widespread damage and destruction caused by the 2 devastating Category 5 hurricanes that hit in late 2017. We must focus on fundamentals, longer-term issues that need to be addressed by Congress, including your committee and OIA. Further, as recent experiences in Puerto Rico have shown that the United States must recognize its special responsibilities for the U.S. territories and potentially deleterious effects that federal policies can have on the territories and U.S. citizens therein. The United States must face those responsibilities head-on and commit sufficient federal resources to fulfill its responsibilities to the territories on a sustainable basis. The Virgin Islands believes the time is right for a comprehensive revision of the territory's economic relationship with the United States, one that will place the territory on a path to true and sustainable fiscal health. As part of its long-standing tax relationship with the Virgin Islands, Congress has historically provided that all federal taxes on all products, including rum manufactured in the Virgin Islands, be returned or covered over to the local treasury. Rum tax revenues covered over to the Virgin Islands constitute a major source of funding for the territory, and are used to finance essential public services and to securitize the territory's bonds and facilitate the territory's future access to the capital markets. The timing of these temporary extensions often causes budget planning problems and uncertainties for the Virgin Islands. The Virgin Islands requests that OIA and the committee support the Virgin Islands' efforts in Congress to make the temporary rate permanent and thereby avoid the need for periodic, often last-minute increases. The cover-over provision that results in the Virgin Islands receiving the federal tax revenues on rum products applies broadly to tax revenues generated by all articles produced in the Virgin Islands and transported to the United States. From the mid-1960s through 2012, a major oil refinery operated on the island of St. Croix and generated substantial federal excise taxes, which, on the face of the governing statute, should have been recovered to the Virgin Islands Treasury in the same manner as rum excise taxes. The Virgin Islands requests that OIA and the committee work with other committees to effect passage of an amendment that finally seals and returns Section 7652 to its intended function and requires that fuel excise taxes be included in the cover-over program. The Federal Earned Income Tax Credit, or the EITC, and the Child Tax Credit are intended to encourage and foster work among low-income individuals. The federal government effectively funds their programs for all states and the District of Columbia through the IRC. While a worthy goal, these tax credits have an unintended and unfair consequences in the Virgin Islands as well as other territories, due to its status as a mirror tax code system. Unlike in the states and DC, the cost of the Earned Income Tax Credit is borne solely by the fiscally stressed Virgin Islands and Guam, a cost which neither territory can bear. As a matter of fairness and to avoid imposing an onerous financial burden on the local treasury, Congress should provide for federal reimbursement. The Virgin Islands would like to thank this body for all of the work that it has done to secure Medicaid to thousands of Virgin Islanders, but that issue still remains unresolved. We also have many requests into Congress in terms of providing for visa waivers to make us more sustainable in terms of allowing visitors not only for medical needs but for tourism, and we're asking for the support in this in the Homeland Security. Our infrastructure has stayed at the same level from federal highway funds for over 30 years now and continues to be an issue for Virgin Islanders. Lastly, I'd like to say the Insular Areas Act has expressed the policy of Congress that the 4 small territories should be provided certain flexibilities under federal grant programs. Importantly, the Act as amended mandates that the Department of the Interior shall waive matching requirements for all insular areas under all of its grants programs, and requires all other departments and agencies to waive any requirement for local matching. However, FEMA has not waived the local match for most categories of public assistance in response to Hurricanes Irma and Maria, requiring that the Virgin Islands come up with millions of dollars that are still being supplied by a federal mandate under the CDBG-DR. The GVI proposes that the Act be amendment to provide a statutory presumption in favor of waiving the local share to foster economic development and stability, and to update the relationship of the territories to the federal government. There is no other state in the Union that has as much federal land as percentage-wise as the Virgin Islands. The Office of Insular Affairs owns 66% of St. John, yet our payment in lieu of taxes is a mere $30,000 compared to that should be closer to $30 million. Just on a glance, the federal government owns more than 14% of the land in the Virgin Islands, and all we get is a 30%. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify before this committee. We have submitted a full written testimony that expands on the subject matter that I have briefly discussed. While many of these issues are longstanding, we look forward to working with this committee and the Office of Insular Affairs to bring final resolution to these matters. Our goal is not simply to survive, but our goal is to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. I now recognize the Honorable Arno I. Palacios, Lieutenant Governor for the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Governor, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Sablon, ranking members, and other members of your committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify this afternoon. I'm here on behalf of Governor Torres, who sends his regrets for not being here to speak with you once again. This past year has presented challenges that have truly showcased how vulnerable our community is to threats beyond our control. Having successfully exited the austerity measures we imposed on our employees in the government after Super Typhoon Yutu, Governor Torres and I is in the CNMI today working to contain the economic collapse following the outbreak of the novel coronavirus, which has significantly impacted our tourism arrival to the islands, effectively crippling the economy's sole industry. As a result of this outbreak, the CNMI expect to lose 150,000 tourist arrival, primarily from China, and 30% of our expected total annual arrivals for this fiscal year. This year has proven that our economic development trajectory has led us to a position that is the definition of fragility. In a moment without a single instant of an outbreak in the CNMI, we lost the second largest tourism market due to a force that we cannot even see. As you know, Section 701 of our covenant states that the United States will assist us in our efforts to achieve a progressively higher standard of living for our people as part of this American family and develop the economic resources needed to meet the responsibilities of local self-government. President Trump's budget submission for fiscal year 2023 reaffirmed this commitment and is now more urgent than ever to revisit what is being a member of the American economic community means. We wish to thank the Department of Interior and OIA for their commitment to seeing tangible results in our CIP program and other funding support. The Congress and the administration must continue to recognize that a modern functional infrastructure is an absolute prerequisite to economic development in all insular areas. The CIP program assists us in this effort. However, the program has been $27.7 million since the inception of the CNMI in 1978 and continues at this level when it was modified to include Guam, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We would like to see Congress increase the level of funding for the CIP programs in our insular areas. The CNMI once again urges the review, therefore, of the CIP grants programs to allow to increase in the budgeted amount that adjusts to inflation for inflationary costs, current infrastructure needs of the U.S. territories. Mr. Chairman, I wish to thank all the members of this committee for your continued support through the many challenges we have faced in our current immigration transition period. Governor Torres and I continue to say that we have every interest in creating more jobs and opportunities for U.S. workers in the Commonwealth. But improvements can be made from our experience thus far. I wish to offer the following recommendations for your consideration. Number one, allow the CNMI government to participate in the labor certification process in a similar manner as is allowed for our sisters and brothers in Guam. Number two, fully lift the exclusion of construction workers from the CW1 program. A full relief of this restriction will help support the development of our new homes damaged by our typhoons and to further develop the economy towards increased jobs and opportunities for U.S. workers. Three, eliminate the touchback. We ask that you eliminate the touchback provision to prevent a quarter of the labor force departing the CNMI for an intermediate number of months, indeterminate number of months at the start of fiscal year 2021. Mr. Chairman, we need your assistance. The American economic community promise to our forefathers is not defined by the rigor of our regulations. It is defined by the promise of our ideals. I believe this is to be true, and I look forward to continuing to work alongside you as we inch closer to that dream of real membership in this great community. Before closing, Congressman, I wish to also extend our appreciation for your work and those of the other congressional members from the insular areas on the new Medicaid allocation. This was one of the most welcome news in our healthcare system. Thank you. Smasi Olamoy.
Buen provecho, Governor. She's Smasi looking. And I'd like to now welcome the Governor of Guam, the Honorable Lou Leon Guerrero. Governor, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Congressman Huffaday and Sidhu Samasi, for the opportunity to appear before this committee today to make comments on the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget requests for the Department of the Interior. My testimony on OIA's budget will be brief. Throughout OIA's existence, the U.S. territories have largely benefited from the flexibility of federal grants that respond to the diverse needs of our islands. These grants vary. OIA's role in providing this assistance continues to be an important part of Guam's strategic growth. But we are appreciative of more than OIA's funding. We are also very valuable in its partnership and advocacy within the federal bureaucracy. Having served my first year as governor of Guam, I have been witness to this value firsthand. As this committee contemplates OIA's fiscal year 2021 requests, I am in favor of increasing the budget that provides for territorial assistance in the areas of technical assistance, maintenance assistance, and energizing insular communities. The purposes of these areas, along with the flexibility maintained by OIA to prioritize these grants, respond to both basic and growing needs of U.S. island communities. U.S. territories, however, need changes in policy that this committee has supported in the first session of the 116th Congress. Specifically, I would like to acknowledge Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Bishop, and Delegate Khalili Sablan for convening a hearing that identified the Medicaid cliff caused by expiring provisions of the Affordable Care Act for the territories. Through their leadership, the work of this committee, and the Congress as a whole, millions of Americans living in the territories maintain their access to health care without unfair matching rates or onerous caps. As a result of this committee's interest and advocacy, the Congress passed legislation that raised the caps for all U.S. territories and changed our matching formula from 43% to 17% for the next 2 years. We are, of course, grateful for this new formula and that Guam's cap was raised from $18 million to $127 million per year. And Congressman, be assured we will spend all that money. However, we should be treated no differently than if one resided in a state. I am hopeful that when Congress revisits this issue, that state-like treatment for Medicaid can be fully extended to U.S. territories. Similarly, U.S. territories whose tax code mirrors the U.S. tax code find themselves treated differently with the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a program that benefits working people with low to moderate income. I am in favor of programs such as this. However, its application in Guam and other territories is a burden on our local coffers. The EITC benefit is directly paid out by the U.S. Treasury and is estimated to be a $56 billion program. However, such benefit is not one assumed directly by the federal government. Rather, the benefit is paid directly out from our local coffers. For Guam, the estimated value annual cost is $60 million, a benefit that is otherwise paid by the federal government in every state of the union, and a figure which, if left in Guam's budget, would allow us to nearly retire our deficit, make investments into education and public safety, or replace our only public hospital. I applaud House Ways and Means Chairman Richard Neal for authoring H.R. 3300, the Economic Mobility Act of 2019, and for its inclusion in the recent supplemental bill passed by the House last week. The language will direct the U.S. Treasury to reimburse Guam for 75% of its EITC costs. Mr. San Nicolas is a sponsor of this bill, and though I believe that Guam and our sister territories should be treated equally with the states by reimbursing us 100% of our costs, H.R. 3300 is a step towards fairness. As I give this testimony, I cannot help but think how many governors of Guam have covered the same ground. For years, territorial governors sitting in hearings like this have highlighted the costs associated with the compacts of free association. While these bilateral documents help to offset China's growing influence in the Western Pacific and preserve our national security interests, Guam and other affected jurisdictions are left to fund the consequences of unmitigated migration. While Guam's compact-related expenditures far outweighs the federal offset, equally to only 10% of our total island costs. The methodology used to calculate this cost is often the subject of skepticism and inquiry. The economic benefit analysis will accompany shortly our federal report. With the upcoming negotiations to extend financial terms of the current compact nears, I implore this committee to encourage the administration to consider including as agenda items a screening program by the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that migration to U.S. jurisdiction complies with the compact. I would like them to reimburse Guam 100% of our total costs. I would also like the committee to consider providing greater support to FAS countries in developing their economies and opportunities for their people. As the committee is aware, as a strategic location for the country's projection of forces in the Indo-Pacific region, Guam is host to a multi-billion-dollar military infrastructure. We soon will have a home inaugurated as the Camp Blas, and we will be endeavoring about $8 billion in cost, an expense shared by both Japan and the United States. In the past, Congress has created a Guam-only visa waiver program and has also removed Guam from the national cap on H-2 labor. Given these precedents, I am advocating that Congress pass legislation to create a Guam-only H-2 labor program. I am hopeful that you would consider my proposal as I advocate for it this year. Finally, I want to thank this committee for its expeditious action on H.R. 1365, and we're equally grateful to the Office of Insular Affairs role and to that of the Assistant Secretary Doug Dominich for the interagency effort to work bipartisanly with my administration that has allowed Guam to make awards to those remaining survivors. The ability to do this while still supporting the passage of H.R. 1365 and maintaining our local action does not abdicate or negate the need for action by Congress. We are appreciative of the committee's longstanding involvement, dating back to our first delegate, Antonio Wampet, and with every delegate who has championed the issue of parity in Guam. Mr. Bloss, Mr. Underwood, Ms. Berdaliu, and your current colleague, Mr. San Nicolas. We are hopeful that U.S. Senate will pass H.R. 1365. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before this committee, and I apologize for going over by 3 minutes, 44 seconds, but we have all traveled very far, and thank you for your patience in listening to our testimony. Thank you.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. It's our privilege that all three of you all actually are here this afternoon. First, I'd like to seek unanimous consent that the delegate from the U.S. Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, be allowed to sit on the dais and ask questions. Without objections, so ordered. And it's now time for members to ask questions. Members will each have 5 minutes to ask their questions and get the response. There will be questions. I will, and I would think that others would be submitting questions for the records. The committee will forward those questions to you, the witnesses, and look forward to getting responses in 10 days, period. Thank you. So I yield myself 5 minutes for questions. Again, welcome, governors. And I understand that economic development was a theme of IGIA, to the end of this year's theme, but clearly all the insular areas are struggling. I'm happy that issues identified by territorial governors last year were reported as addressed. The Medicaid cliff and FMAP, natural disaster recovery, foreign worker visas, federal tax policy, the Guam World War II Recognition Act, cabotage for the American Samoa. I am not sure how the other delegates feel, but some of these issues that I worked on, I've never heard anything from OIA. It was congressional members working together on the Medicaid. It's an over 2 years work. But, so I'm gonna ask, did any of you hear any proposals this morning that will get your economies growing? Governor Bryan?
We were the ones doing the proposing in terms of growing our economy. One of the things that came up key that I mentioned was that we need to be aligned with U.S. foreign policy in the Caribbean as well as in the Pacific for my friends. We don't really see a strategy that's beyond us. I mean, we are so small, anything that happens. We also pointed out the fact that Puerto Rico has been under duress for several years now, and there's been no real definitive action by the United States Congress or the administration to help to create a vehicle that would put us on a road to sustainability again. And at the same time, they watch us headed down the same track as Puerto Rico has been and there's no help in sight. I mean, more than putting the PROMESA in there, there's not been an act that would create more pharmaceutical companies, an advantage to distillation, or some other economic incentive that would create prosperity and sustainability.
Thank you. I have 5 minutes, so I really, with no
Oh, I thought it was my 5 minutes. I'm sorry, sir.
Sorry. Governor Palacios, did you hear anything specific that proposals that would get the Marianas economy growing?
Well, nothing specific. We pointed out a lot of issues that needs to be addressed. EDA was there. There were several departments, federal departments that offered the assistance. But you know, we always talk about capacity. And there are times when we just don't have the capacity. Surely, with a nation like the United States, which is the most prosperous country in the world, it's got to be a policy that would work for the insular areas. Somebody within the federal machinery can certainly take a look at this issue and say, what can we do to craft policies for the Virgin Islands, for the Commonwealth, for Guam, as they are unique.
And Department of Interior's governor is supposed to be our advocates and the executive branch. And I will be remiss if I don't say that, you know, they not exactly have stellar records. I'm not saying they have not done anything, but there's a lot of we wish they would do a little bit more. I have 47 seconds. Governor Guerrero?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. Yes, we actually were driving the discussions. However, they did talk about opportunity zones and the process that they've done to help us along and encouraged us to take advantage of that tax incentive program. They also talked a lot, we also talked a lot about workforce development and the importance of apprenticeship, business-private partnerships. But I think as territories, we need to be the one aggressively driving the agenda, and that's what I would like to see. And I just want to say we have a very good working relationship with OIA, and in fact, they were very, very visible in our National Governors Association. So I do appreciate that working relationship, and of course, we have to bring in our Congress delegates also.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My time is up. So I know you recognize the ranking member, a gentle lady from Puerto Rico. She has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Sablan, and again, thank you all the governors for being here. I know many of the situations that we all face are examples of what is living in the territory, so I will begin with Lieutenant Governor for the Northern Mariana Islands, specifically about the bill, and you were saying about, can you discuss the importance of the capital improvement project grants having CNMI, and how this capital improvement projects dollars aid during Typhoon Yuru recovery efforts. If you can, and remember, I got just 4 minutes, so if we can be concise so I can do another questions.
The capital improvement issue that I brought up is actually a funding that was under the provision of our covenant, our agreement with the federal government to come into the U.S. family of $27 million a year. Somehow, somewhere, sometime, that disappeared. I don't know why it disappeared, how it disappeared, but the fact of the matter is that today, instead of $27 million, the Commonwealth only gets $9 million to do infrastructure development. Some of those monies now goes to our brothers and sisters in Guam, brothers and sisters in American Samoa, and our brothers and sisters in Virgin Islands, and I think even Puerto Rico. Now, we don't want to take those monies back from our brothers and sisters in these other insular areas. We want and we'd like to see if Congress would consider increasing the level of that funding for the insular areas so that everybody has a bigger piece of this pie.
Lieutenant Governor, I know the tourism is one of the biggest areas in your economy, and I don't know what's the Department of Interior helping you out, considering the coronavirus and many other stuff in the Pacific as well. But in terms of the territorial assistance line item, which of the programs, in terms of technical assistance, maintenance assistance, coral reef initiatives, among many others, which one of them is the most important one, the most that CNMI get more benefits from?
Saying is the CIP money, the $9 to $15 million, and perhaps the technical assistance program.
In terms of, I'm going to do kind of the same question to the Honorable Governor of Guam. You asked in your statement for support for an increase in the territorial assistance. Which program under that umbrella is most helpful to Guam?
I would say they're all three equally important, but I think for the most part, I think the technical assistance is very important because it provides us with help in whatever projects that we're going through. For example, automation is one, and just maybe, sorry, analytics and data collection so we can have a much better understanding of our issues in Guam. But I believe they're all equally important, but if I had to choose, I would say technical assistance.
I would never put you to choose, but I just want to know which one of them are the most important in terms of helping you out, the most positive impact. I was thinking about when we went there, we saw the brown tree snake control program, among many others. You see, I remember. So if you can have some of those programs specifically, you say technical assistance, and I will go back now to U.S. Virgin Islands. Governor, I know tourism for you as well is one of the most important tools. What the U.S. Virgin Islands is doing actually to cope with the situation in terms of the industry recovering from the hurricanes, and what advantage for the U.S. Virgin Islands in the budget are included in terms of the budget that is included there?
We don't see any direct benefit to the budget, but on the other question, I think at this point in time, the coral reef is very important, only because we have a new blight in the Caribbean. That is, we really don't have an answer, and no one has an answer for it. The reefs also sustained damage in the boat storms, and I know Puerto Rico was getting some money, and then it stopped at FEMA for coral reef repair and revitalization. The CIP money is very important to us too, but at this time we have a lot of other federal aid that helps along with that. And it just patches those little holes that we don't have local money for or federal funding. But the coral reef is something that we really need to bump up and pay attention to as we move forward.
Thank you. You.
I thank the ranking member. I next recognize the distinguished gentleman from Guam, Mr. San Nicolas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to I want to begin by thanking you for your leadership on this committee, and also thanking you for your leadership with respect to our recent achievements on our Medicaid funding. I know that you've been working on that for many years. I'd also like to thank my colleague to my left, Congresswoman Plaskett, for her leadership in pushing for the EITC issue for many years. I'd like to thank our ranking member and our colleague with Puerto Rican descent for our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters always being here for us as well. And our brother from Hawaii, thank you so much also as well for always looking out for the needs of our territories. I was very interested to listen to the responses to the question from my chairman with respect to economic development initiatives that were discussed today. I think that as much as we want to secure more federal funding for the needs of our territories, our ability to grow into our own capacity is something that's going to benefit all of us, regardless of whether or not we're going to be successful in securing legislation for more federal funding. And I wanted to just inform the governors that one of the things that I'm going to be working on is something that we worked on earlier with respect to trying to secure an Office of Territorial Exporting within the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Right now, there is no specific focus on territories. That's about $145 million of export-import financing support that has not been reaching territories. I know that my colleague from Puerto Rico has about maybe 30 different companies that have been able to avail of that. But as far as the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam, we have still not been able to tap into that resource. So hopefully we can get that legislation through the Financial Services Committee. But in the meantime, I think that it'll be great for the respective administrations to begin looking at that opportunity so that we can begin to align local policy with federal policy. One of the things that has allowed us to be successful in this past year for something as dramatic as Medicaid is the fact that if we're able to identify common denominators within each of the territories and focus our energies on advocating for that specific common denominator, then we're not taking as much of a shotgun approach. We're able to laser in and actually make some major achievements. And so I wanted to ask the governors, because I know that you all had your own individual lists of needs, and we're not going to neglect those lists, but if the governors can come together and inform us of what they can agree on as a common denominator that all of us up here can advocate for within our respective capacities. Governor Bryan, I guess you can go ahead and begin.
Thank you. I think immediately Medicaid is one that is really huge, and then the other one is the visa waivers. We've been asking for that for quite some time. They're the GILTI tax changes in the law that make other tax incentive areas that are foreign more attractive than we are. I think those are three right off the cuff that would give us that sustainability and give us the ability to do a lot of things.
Is the EITC something that is a major issue that the Virgin Islands wants to have addressed here by this body?
To make out to how important that is, it accounts for almost 40% of our tax returns in any given year. We're behind a year and a half. This past year, we kind of made a record with $70 million in tax return. It's more than ever been returned in Virgin Islands in 1 year.
Thank you, Governor. I don't mean to cut you off, but I do have limited time. Thank you, Governor. Lieutenant Governor Palacios.
Thank you. I was just listening to some of the testimonies of the two governors. Actually, Governor Liu had mentioned something regarding federal payment, taking control of the EITC issue so that the territories don't have to be burdened with this requirement. Whereas in the mainland United States, the federal government pays out. You know, these are very, very critical amount of funding for our governments. And if we're burdened with these things, so that's one issue that I believe I can get on. Right now, we don't pay that. But in my very brief discussion yesterday with my congressman, he said, you know, we are actually risking being sued by somebody in the Northern Marianas on this particular issue, and I can assure you we will most likely lose. In that regards,
Governor, I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to afford my governor a quick opportunity to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, Medicaid is a benefit of all that. We did write a letter uniting together in this common issue, and I'm going to look forward to also coming forward with the EITC issue as it does affect each of us. And Congressman, I have been in communication with the governor from the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I have been in communication with the governor from the CNMI. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas. Mr. Soto, sir, you have 5 minutes.
I'm all about empowering our U.S. territories, and with that spirit in mind, I yield to the gentleman from Guam.
The gentleman has 5 minutes.
I thank my colleague. Thank you. So as we were discussing that common denominator of EITC, I think that that's something that we all should begin rallying around. I'd like my colleagues to just kind of put that on notice because The EITC, I know for Guam, accounts for about 1/3 of the total tax refund liability paid out by the Territorial of nearly between $56 to $60 million. So you're talking about 30% of a component on the Guam tax refund budget, 40% on the U.S. Virgin Islands. And Governor Palacios, I know that on the CNMI, they recover the EITC by taxing it back. So, I'm not even sure if it's necessary to make any changes, because if the language is written that the rebate would still kick in, then even if you taxed it back, you would still get that rebate on top of it. So I'm glad that the governors are able to share with us that particular common denominator on EITC. And I would just like to put my colleagues on notice, because that's something that actually we were able to move forward recently. And I know that my colleague to my left spoke very passionately about some components of that particular bill. I know that my colleagues from Puerto Rico are very active in getting that bill passed through the House, HR 5687. And that key language in there that also addressed the EITC for our territories is language that I'm hoping we're going to be able to protect if the bill goes into conference. And if we run into any kind of problems getting the bill through because the administration has already signaled that they have issues with it, I'm hoping that my colleagues can help us to find additional avenues for our EITC concern to still be able to find that channel, because one of the very significant things about having that language pass through HR 5687 is that it at least indicates that members of the House of Representatives are open to allowing for that kind of language to be included, not just in the recent legislation that was passed, but in the future legislation that we may be able to find a vehicle for. And with that, I don't want to use up all of my colleagues' time. I'll yield back to my colleague from Florida.
I reclaim my time and yield to the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands.
Thank you very much for your cooperation and support of the territories all of the time.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you so much, sir. I wanted to ask, Governor Bryant, you talked a little bit about the coral and how important it is. What effect would a decaying coral reef have on tourism that fuels our local economy?
The Virgin Islands is home to several national monuments, including the one on St. John and the Buck Island National Monument in St. Croix. Depletion of this coral not only harms us in terms of our tourism product. The wall in St. Croix is also, it's not a national monument, but it's also a world-famous diving site. The depletion of our coral not only hurts our tourism product, but hurts our fisheries, hurts our ability for our fishermen to make a living. As you know, the parrotfish is one of the fish that feed off the coral and will be greatly affected by this blight. Furthermore, the scope of this is way beyond our capabilities as an island, and we've been finding it difficult just to identify and get the support. We continue to be plagued by invasive species and blights. The lionfish is still a problem for us. The blight now in the coral, a second of blight that we're discovering now. And also we have recently been invaded by boas. We have a real boa problem on the island that we never had seen before on St. Croix.
Thank you. Under the President's administration's his budget request for fiscal year 2021, under the Coral Reef Initiative in OIA's budget, it's proposed to cut that Coral Reef program by $1.6 million. Will that have an effect on your work to sustain the Coral Reef?
It will absolutely have an effect. Even though we've been bolstered by the Nature Conservancy trying to grow coral in small farms, this blight is something that we weren't dealing with before. As a fisherman, a hobbyist fisherman, and a spearfisher, I could tell the difference in the coral reefs from time I was in high school and then 1989 with the storm. Buck Island had just begun to come back almost 30 years later, and now we've had great damage to the reefs again. The waters in the pound and break the coral reefs, and they fall over, and it takes them a really long time to recover. That damages fishing grounds, fish and wildlife, and as I said, the tourism.
Thank you.
Claim my time and yield back.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, the cut to the Coral Reef Initiative and Natural Resources, and their proposed budget is 64% from, like the gentlelady said, 2.6 million, cut to $946,000. I now recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's truly an honor for me to be a member, together with my colleagues here, of our Island Jurisdiction Caucus in Congress, and my colleague to my immediate right from Florida, he's an honorary member, so he's participating here too. Look, this is pretty serious. Yesterday we saw the president's budget, and I assume that you have all taken at least a preliminary look at it, and if you haven't, it is devastating to the Office of Insular Affairs. It is a reduction, again, of somewhere around 20-25%. That is after the prior year in which the same thing happened, and Congress had to restore the funding to the Office of Insular Affairs for a number of different projects. We see here that technical assistance is reduced very significantly from 20 million to 14. Maintenance assistance, 4 million to 1 million. Brown tree snake control, 3.5 million down to 2.8. Coral reefs, as the chair just noted, 2.6 down to 950. Emerging insular communities, 6.2 down to 2.8, and a complete zeroing out of the discretionary compact impact aid. Complete zeroing out of $4 million of compact impact aid. Now, there is mandatory compact impact aid, but there is discretionary over and above that, and that's what this administration has gone after. And it puzzles me, well, I don't know if that's the right word. I'm amazed. I don't understand it. There seems to be some level of actual animus inside somewhere in this administration to federal funding to our territories through the Office of Insular Affairs. And I don't know whether any of you have any explanation for it. Is this some miscommunication between our territories and our federal government? Is it a lack of advocacy inside the administration? Because certainly Congress is favorable to this funding. We have restored it and increased it in many areas. And it's a little bit of a rhetorical question I'm going to leave you with, because I want to ask you, Governor Guerrero, some very specific questions about a compact impact aid, which we share a great concern about. You spoke earlier about compact impact aid and about how strongly you felt about that. I think the figure is that we both get 14 million, or have at least, in mandatory compact impact aid. CNMI gets a little bit, as I recall. And that's about it for compact impact aid. Now, my state's direct expenses for compact impact assistance are quantified at 187 million. I think your colleague, my colleague here, as I recall, Congressman, quantified it for Guam at somewhere in the range of 200 million. So we're talking about the same amount. You have more compact residents, and in some cases your cost differential is correct. Would you say that is, and we have, by the way, taken the position collectively that in the renegotiation of the compacts, we are not willing to just roll over and accept and ratify, which is Congress's obligation and duty and choice, another set of compacts as they come up for renegotiation, unless there is substantial increases in compact funding. Would you agree with that, Governor?
I certainly do, and I'm very thankful for your passion and your advocacy for it. Governor Ige and myself are in communications of how we can calculate it so that GAO becomes much more favorable to maybe looking at our report and giving us more confidence and credibility in our reports. We average about $150 million a year, and if you extrapolate that out, it's almost to $1 billion. And so we are very concerned about it. We see it in our public safety, we see it in our health, and we see it in our education. But I also want to say that we welcome our brothers and sisters to help improve their quality of life. But I think federal government has a responsibility to help us along with that, as we're not part of the negotiations and decisions are made without our input.
Governor, we're intending to insert ourselves into the negotiations on this point, and already have, because if we simply do what we did the last time around, your bill and my bill is going to be well over a couple $100 million within a very short period of time, and that's unfair to both of us. Governor Bryan, my time is up, but I appreciate your comments on the coral reefs as well. This is a major area of funding that has been slashed. We have the same goals in the oceans that we live and work and play in. And we're completely supportive of, I am completely supportive of your comments, as are many members of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time is up. Thank you. Just for the record, the Department of Interior's Office of Insular Affairs has decreased every line item on their budget except for their operations, the office. Everything else is a decrease, but they gave their operations, the cost of operations, an increased. We're going to have a second round of questioning. I'm sorry. I apologize sincerely. I recognize the distinguished gentlelady from the U.S. Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I first want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of the committee testimony today. I think it's so important, these discussions, and I'm grateful for the care that you take to addressing the issues of the territories in this committee. One of the things that I wanted to ask, as you know, so many of us are dealing with recovery from natural disasters, Northern Marianas, Puerto Rico, as well as the Virgin Islands. Governor Bryant, what are some of the primary issues that the Virgin Islands may be having with federal agencies involved in the recovery, like FEMA and HUD?
Thank you, Delegate. First of all, one of the major things for us is power energy in the Virgin Islands. Our power bills are 4 times that of the average of the nation. It was very disruptive for us, for HUD to take out the ability for us to use CDBG, DR funds, community grant funds, to use to help us rebuild our power systems and create cheaper, more efficient power in the use of propane, as well as solar and other things that we're doing. The other thing that I keep pressing is the 10% waiver. It really doesn't make sense for for FEMA to require us to have a 10% match and then us to take the money out of HUD. The same community development block grants that the federal government is giving us to pay it. It's not like we're paying it out of our own. And then lastly,
Excuse me, could you tell us how much money then that you would have to use of your own CDBG grant funding to utilize for the 10%?
So that would be about $500 million, which is over 25% of the money that we're being granted in order to make the 10% grant, which makes absolutely no sense.
When this body, Congress, gave the authority for those agencies to waive that statutory requirement.
That is correct. $550 million is more than 75% of our general fund budget. That's a lot of money. So the other piece is there has to be a different approach. FEMA is good at response, but they're not so good at recovery. Island nations cannot be forced to wait 10 years to recover. We have storms that come every season. This is we're in year 2.5, and we still haven't finished our temporary hospital. We need to have an expedited way, so we skip all of these NEPA, Army Corps, and all of the other processes and be able to rebuild our schools, hospital, roadways, infrastructure in a quick way.
I know one of the things that you've talked about is on the island of St. John, which is really important to this committee and natural resources, the relationship with the national parks. That also leads to issues that local residents have on St. John with property tax. I know that you have a proposal to address that. Would you like to share that with this committee?
So there's a real terrible relationship now by the people who live on St. John and the Park Service. It's 66% of the land on St. John is parkland and can never be developed or built on. This creates, the unintended consequence is a very inflated land price. A piece of an acre of land at St. John can go for $1 million just raw land. That creates a situation where, too, you're having a high tax impact on St. Johnians who have large tracts of land. Because of this $1 million acre next to you, you have 20 acres, your land taxes could be in the $30,000, $40,000 a year, while the federal government only pays 66% for $30,000 for all the land they have in the Virgin Islands, including that in St. John. If there was a mechanism that allowed for St. Johnians to benefit from that federal land being there by an investment in their infrastructure, whether it be in their schools, their hospital, or their recreational facilities, it would soften the blow and make people understand. Also, the delegate has a piece of legislation to stop the Park Service from buying any more or taking on any more land in St. John. The park is big enough. They have way more land than they will ever use. And I ask you to support the delegate's measure in Congress.
Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the committee in the remaining time that I have?
The one thing that I always stress is that no matter what state you're in, you're probably going to be you're going to be a victim of disaster. When you compare Puerto Rico's place to where we are in the Virgin Islands, you can see we're far ahead. Not only because we're good, but because Puerto Rico has many layers of government and is very complicated to get that aid to where it's need be. That's the same type of situation you're going to be in your state when you get into a disaster. The Virgin Islands is a good place to test programs that expedite the federal recovery process so that when it happens in your state, it won't take you 10 years to get back to where your residents once were. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. I know that Congressman Graves and I have a piece of legislation that we have in Transportation Infrastructure Committee to expedite that process, and we're hoping to get that to the floor in some time. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you. You don't mind going into second rounds, governors? Thank you. Okay, we're going to have a second round again. I yield myself 5 minutes. Just a commentary on Mr. Kay's comments about the department maybe having some kind of, maybe a hidden agenda against the territories. I will say that I'm not sure because it wasn't like this. It hasn't always been like this. We have an assistant secretary in the room, and he came. He consulted delegates, he consulted us about what we thought about his plans. So it was not always like this.
The chair to yield, just for a quick comment.
Yes.
I certainly didn't want to, my comments were very non-specific as to where the problem is, and I have always found the Department of the Interior and the folks that work in DOI to be very committed to the territory. So I suspect strongly that the issue as to why this funding continues to be cut lies in another area than the actual Department of the Interior.
So I will go back, and so Congress provided $20.8 million for, let me go to Compact Impact. The governors, Pacific governors know that the federal government made an error in how it counts the number of freely associated states immigrants are in Hawaii, Samoa, Guam, and the Marianas. So as a result, the OIA has proposed cutting what Samoa, what Guam, and the Marianas get in Compact Impact to make up for what Hawaii did not get in past years. Hawaii should get more money, but the other insular areas should not have to pay for OIA's mistake. Governors Palacios, Governor Guerrero, do you think we should reduce the administrative budget of OIA or the Secretary's budget to make up for their mistake rather than making you pay? Yes or no?
Oh, she's yielding to me. I really believe, I do not agree, and I strongly oppose any kind of deductions from our compact. First of all, we have never been overfunded. And one of the comments made was that we were overfunded the last 4 years as a result of not having correct census
That
numbers.
wasn't your mistake, Governor.
It was not my
So
mistake.
do you think that you should be caught? Your Compact Impact money should not be caught, and
I do not
so
believe
your
it should
answer
be
is-
cut.
So it's no.
No,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely not.
Governor Palacios?
And could I just say, Governor Ige agrees with me.
Governor Palacios, yes or no?
No.
Okay, thank you. So, but let me ask you also, does the administration, your administration, does the Northern Marianas provide reports on the cost of hosting compact impact migrants as required?
Host,
Yeah.
cost of housing?
Yeah, I mean, hosting.
Oh, hosting. We do submit a report to OIA for the small amount of funding that we get from Compact Impact.
No, I'm sort of like a small census count of how many COFA citizens reside in the Marianas. I think we've been negligent, Governor, at this point. Guam has been
Guam has
reporting.
more, yeah.
On this count, the Northern Marianas has not been up par, so we actually wrote a letter and asking the governor to come back in compliance with the law.
I'll take a look at that.
But, yeah, but I have no scruples in getting up and make, amending the next fiscal year budget, which, to be very honest, would probably be in the next January. It'd be between the election day and the new Congress. But let me also ask, I have 40 seconds. So Congress provided $20.8 million for technical assistance to the Insular Areas last year and this year, but the administration keeps trying to cut. So this year it's 14.7. We're going to work hard to increase that money. OIA hands out technical assistance money in response to requests from governors and others. Congress gives them free rein, but I want to ask whether you would prefer more control of the money. Would you like us to take some of the technical assistance loss fund and put it into implementing specific programs, the coral reef, the compact impact, the help CIP money? I mean, what do you think? My time is up, so you could respond and as quick as possible, and then I will yield.
I wouldn't mind putting it in other projects, but would like to give input in where we can prioritize that.
Thank you.
That could be a workable solution.
Thank you. I know you to Ms. Colon for her 5 minutes.
I will reserve.
Okay.
Reserve.
She reserves. She won't give it to me. So I know you'll give it to Mr. San Nicolas. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully she's reserving so she can give it to me. But I wanted to follow up with your line of questioning, Mr. Chairman, and your commentary with respect to the concern about the compact funding error that the administration is going to be looking to recover. And I wanted to put on the record, Mr. Chairman, that we need to be very, very cautious about the kind of precedents that the quote-unquote solution is going to set with respect to what this is going to entail. If the census is making errors in counts, and those errors in counts are resulting in some areas getting overfunded and some areas getting underfunded, how we address that census error, I think, is going to set a precedence in this case with respect to every other census error that may happen in the future. For example, if the census makes an error in the counts for veterans in a number of states, and that impacts the funding available for veteran services in the various states, are the states then going to take the reductions in future veteran funding in order to offset miscounts by the census in prior years? Those are the kinds of things that I think need to be put on the table, because right now it's very easy for territories to just be thrown this very roughshod solution of, oh, well, we overpaid you then, we're just going to underpay you now. But if we're going to be looking at fairness in terms of the allocation of dollars with respect to census counts, then we need to understand that if we're going to be doing this to the territories today, every other state that may be impacted by a census miscount in the future would have the door open to having the same consequence. And I don't think that territories should suffer this consequence today any more than states should suffer a similar consequence tomorrow. If there is an error in census counts The census budget should absorb that error, and this body should open up the possibility of appropriating not just the funding for the census or for the census's activities, but also backstop funding for any census errors that need to be corrected as a result of funding misapplications. Another precedent that we also need to be very mindful of, Mr. Chairman, is if we insist on that, if we insist on going back and reducing the funding for territories as a result of miscounts in the past, then when our territories finally do come up with a formula that properly prices the cost of the compact impact, then equally, Mr. Chairman, the precedent should be that we should go back to all those prior years and correct the funding that was not properly allocated as a result of those costs. So let's put that on the table in this hearing today, Mr. Chairman, that not only is this conversation about a simple mathematical solution to a funding problem, it's about precedents. What kind of precedents are we going to set, and how are we going to impact territories with respect to that precedence? As a closing, Mr. Chairman, on that subject of compact impact, I wanted to afford our governors an opportunity to clarify certain statements, because I know that in the dialogue, it was expressed that we were overfunded in compact impact over those prior years. But the reality is, for all these years, we've been grossly underfunded in compact impact. And so I wanted to afford our governors an opportunity to speak to compact impact funding, how short it actually has been with respect to the actual costs to the territories.
It's been tremendously short. We have never been overfunded. We've never been overpaid. To give us only $14 million a year for an expenditure of about $150 million a year, $30 million in healthcare, $68 million in education, and the remainder in public safety. To say that it is really injustice to our island. We have always been working very hard and struggling to get our due expenses. And exactly, we are not. And I totally agree with my congressman in his comments and his analysis of the compact impact monies.
Lieutenant Governor Palacios, did you want to chime in?
You know, compact impact it's been an issue of contention ever since it was implemented. At one point, we were up in arms because we had a lot of migrants from the Freely State FAS citizens, but obviously, the issue has become larger in the territory of Guam and Hawaii. So whatever could be done to address the issue needs to be done. We cannot continue to see this issue continue to linger off in the CNMI in Guam and now the state of Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now they recognize the delegate from the Virgin Islands, Ms.
Thank you. Governor Bryan, I wanted to give you some time to discuss the issue of an idea that we have been talking about, which is the special visa waiver program, similar to what has been given in Guam in the Pacific area. How would that be supportive and beneficial to the economy of the Virgin Islands?
One of the things that I discussed today at the IGIA was how both of our islands are in places where they're surrounded by foreign countries. While we regularly look to the U.S. For support, whether in tourism or business or investment, there's 60 million people in the Caribbean at any given time. Because we are not a country, we can't negotiate with any of those countries. We can't trade with any of those countries fairly, and we can't exchange commerce. There's a huge potential for us, because we are in the English-speaking Caribbean, for healthcare to be provided. One of the things that has adversely impacted us since the storm is our hospitals, I mentioned, aren't together yet. we're paying upwards of $250,000 per person to fly individuals from the Virgin Islands to Florida for emergency care, per person. If we were able to expand our hospital systems and the care that we are able to provide in the Caribbean, it would open us up to a lot of new traffic that would come to us, the English-speaking Virgin Islands, rather than go to Miami, which is much further away. Also, there are over 1 million other tourists cruising around in the Caribbean who are coming from European ports that come to the Virgin Islands and can't clear in time because it takes too long. If we had the special visa waivers, these people would be to disembark off those boats and be able to participate in our economy and thereby boost our tourist numbers. Not only boost them, but there are days in the Virgin Islands when there are no ships at the ports, and then there are other days where they're totally clogged, so it's feast or famine. It would help us to better utilize our ports and see a new customer come to the Virgin Islands, bringing in dollars that are otherwise being spent in foreign ports.
I know you talked about the hospitals, rather than people from other islands, St. Kitts, Antigua, going to Canada or to London or other places, they would utilize the Virgin Islands for healthcare benefits. Even our children would be able to compete on a level playing field rather than having to come. It's much cheaper to go to another island than it might, in some instances, to go to Miami or other places. But one of the things that I didn't hear discussed at IGA, which you might have an opportunity here to talk about, is some of the initiatives or support that this Congress can give you in terms of dealing with your retirement pension plan, and support that couldn't be coming from us as the Virgin Islands government has to deal with the large issues with this retirement program in the same way that Northern Marianas and some of the other places have had to deal with that in the past.
So there are over 8,000 people on our current government retirement system right now, and over 9,000 people in the government. That's 17,000 people that rely on this retirement system directly, and probably 34% to 40%, 34 to 40,000 who rely on it indirectly. That's 40% of our population that depends on this system being viable. Currently, we have a $2.8 billion, anywhere from a $1 billion to $2.8 billion shortfall, depending on whose math you're using. The recapture of the gasoline tax would be the first part in providing a steady funding stream in order to float a bond that we would hope that Treasury would be willing to extend to us in order to put $1 billion base in that retirement system. We're not looking for a straight handout. We're just looking for a situation where maybe we'd get 10 years interest only and then start to pay back the principal. That would give us enough time for the system to catch itself. We're not simply just throwing money into it. We have another plan that downgrades the system and allows for 401k program to be reinstituted rather than padding up a retirement system that we know is not sustainable and that we can't afford.
Lieutenant Governor Palacio, I know that Northern Marianas has dealt with this in the past. Is there any insight you want to give us with regard to how to save a government retirement system?
Well, somebody took us to court. And got a court judgment that we have to pay, make sure that we, at least 75% of the pension. But, that was one of the most difficult situations that I've ever faced as a lieutenant governor. 30 days after I got in the pension, the trustee called me up. I actually emailed the governor and said, we're not going to push the button to pay the retirees unless you can come up with $5 million by Tuesday afternoon. Those are the type of horror stories that we have. But we have put ourselves on schedule, put ourselves on a payment schedule, and that becomes a priority in our budget. Can we use the help to pay for those obligations in the past? Definitely. But we don't want to keep coming to the federal government for help.
Thank you. I don't think it's the intention of any of the territories to ask for handouts. We're just acting for equity and the tools to be able to sustain and grow our economies. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Plaskett. I know the gentlelady who's reserved her 5 minutes now is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I know we've been discussing many issues here. And one of the issues that has been part of the discussion now is that requirement that now relies on the hands of the local governments to make the estimates for the migrants that used to be part of the Department of Interior, and then they change it and allow you to do that without reimbursement of the cost of doing that. And I think having the discussion, we should go back to the law President Reagan signed, allowing those costs to be part of the DOI, I may say. And in that sense, if not that, at least the reimbursement of the funds that you're using to make those calculations. But I wanna, and in terms of another area that we can work with is in the renewal of the compact that Secretary Pompeo is saying that are going to be renewed in a few months. We should include that opportunity. That's something that we got in the horizon and should be included there. And thanks God we got this kind of a hearing just to get all that information together and do it in a bipartisan way. In other area that I just want to mention, and I said at the beginning of the hearing, is the issue of the cockfighting. I know that in the case of Puerto Rico, it's been a tough issue because this is part of our economy and it's been legislated in the island. This is a state-regulated economic area since 1922. So this is not new. This is highly regulated. We got judges. You got a complete industry around the cockfighting. So that amendment was passed, and I remember Stacy Blaskin and I were on the floor when that was discussed in an ultimate minute amendment. So in the case of Puerto Rico, we did a state new legislation in December of last year, allowing this to be treated as a state issue, not interfering with the interstate commerce. But again, as territories, we don't have senators. We don't have many members with vote in the floor of the House. So I just want to tell you that anything that we could do together to push for this and how this is impacting our economies and our way of life should be really appreciated. I know we may not have enough time to discuss this issue, but if you can do something in terms of writing, let's have a meeting or something, or the delegates. I need to say we were all in the same page on this issue. We even filed and dropped a bill regarding this. Nothing has happened in the Committee of Agriculture. So we should push together again to see if we can have at least a year or a 2-year waiver to see the economic impact of banning that kind of industry. That's what we're asking. That legislation was approved without any study of the impact of that ban in our respective territories as well. One last issue, and in the case of Puerto Rico, we do have a erosion problem in our beaches, and we managed to secure some funds from the Army Corps of Engineers to make a study in that sense. And I know all islands should have the same situation, specifically U.S. Virgin Islands and us. And I congratulate the U.S. Virgin Islands in getting access to the CDBG-DR funds immediately. In our case, as you may say, we got several layers. And plus to that, an oversight board. And plus to that, we got a monitor. And plus to that, we got an inspector for all of those agencies. So everything is getting longer to get access to those funds. What should be the main issue to develop the economic activity? It will be in tourism, it will be in manufacture, for all of all territories. Should be CDBG funds, should be treated as equally in all federal programs. If we can have that decision today, what Governor Guerrero will be Guam's choice?
I think we should create a different funding source called Territories Economic Development Improvement, and to focus primarily on our each unique ways of our economic development. For us, of course, tourism is one of the biggest driver of our economy, and I'm very concerned about the issue of the coronavirus because it is already affecting our economy in terms of cancellations. So maybe we should think more creatively and create a different fund source and create a different funding unit to, say, economic development for the territories or tourism.
I know my time has expired, but I will really appreciate Lieutenant Governor Palacios and Governor Bryan if we can continue this conversation later on in terms of writing or a phone call. I will really appreciate it. Thank you. I yield back.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before, I thought it would be appropriate to give your delegates my time because 5 minutes just isn't enough, even 10 minutes. But I want to welcome you all. Some of you traveled for hundreds of miles to get here, others thousands, and we welcome you. In Florida, we have some of the same issues we all are facing. We're just a giant state with this disaster relief issues, reef issues, pythons, lionfish, and we have bills that we're working on in this committee to address some of those things. We heard about the disaster relief already, and when I think about everything from Super Typhoon Yutu to Hurricane Irma and Maria to Super Typhoon Hagibis, all of you have either seen destruction or had close calls regarding disaster relief. So it's something we're going to continue to work on. And with reefs, I have a bill with my Boricua sister here, Gonzalez Colon, and with Mr. Case and others that we're hopeful with movement in the Senate we're going to see pass through this bill, as well as we have python hunts in Florida, and we have a lionfish bill that many of us have co-sponsored as well that we're hopeful to address some of those issues. But I want to follow up on what Resident Commissioner Gonzalez Colon talked about, which is, how can we promote some of these high growth industries? And I'm gonna first start with Governor Bryan. What would be probably you think the industry with the most potential right now in the Virgin Islands that we could assist to really boost of all the industries you're working on?
Financial services. If we were to get those tax issues closed, it would have the most immediate impact. And then, of course, the visa waivers. It might come to you as some surprise, but Congresswoman Colon can tell you, you need to clear customs to go to Puerto Rico. I can't sail to Culebra from St. Thomas without getting cleared by customs. That's ridiculous. And on the BVI, it's the British Virgin Islands. You could swim from St. John to Tortola. And you need to clear customs. So easing the waivers in the sector would be tremendous for us. And then the flexibility of funds. We know on a micro level where funds would best be utilized. Grant us the ability to use them for energy especially. That would solve a lot of problems.
One Caribbean, one love, and many visas. That's a disgrace. We have to fix that. Governor Palacios, it would be great to hear, what do you think is probably the biggest high-growth industry you see, and how could we help?
Well, today, earlier in my statement, I stated that tourism is the one and only industry, and its vulnerabilities is very obvious. But there are policies that we've been working, and thanks to Congressman Sablan, who have been helping us with our labor issue to make sure that the industry doesn't all of a sudden collapse because of sudden applications of federal labor policies. He's introduced and had Congress pass legislation, became law that about 2 years ago, federal agencies have yet to promulgate rules and regulations to implement those. On labor, I believe he has 2 legislation or laws already. So sometimes it's prodding. The federal agencies required to assist us in those policies, to help with our industries and the vulnerability of industries.
Thank you,
Today,
Governor. Because my time's limited, I want to make sure, Governor Guerrero, what do you anticipate highest growth industry right now and how we can help?
Our highest growth industry right now, I think, continues to be tourism, although I am looking to diversify it, and I'm really focusing on aquaculture to be a main improved industry in Guam, and agriculture. So budget monies for OEI, if you would not have any decrease in any of those, especially in the technical assistant, would be great, and even increase it. So we can have some Department of Agriculture research and data and so forth in terms of developing aquaculture and agriculture in our island.
Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cox.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman. I just want to say to Governor Bryan, we had a pleasure this morning in Ag Committee to meet Summer Simley Brown, the founder and executive director of the Virgin Islands Good Food Coalition. So you've got a great one there, and her testimony was very, very helpful for looking at farmers markets. But I would like to yield my time to the chairman, Mr. Saban.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cox. Let me just, again, because the theme at IGA was economic development, supposedly, and sometimes it takes more than just money to assist the territories. I mean, I can speak for the Northern Marianas. Governor Palacios and I had a conversation yesterday. Regulations for 2 of the 3 workforce acts are way overdue. Governor Palacios, I need to confirm this, but it has always been my position that the construction workers, 3,000 construction workers, does not need regulations because we already have a Workforce Act regulation that they're using. Of course, they need to go to Labor, Department of Labor, but not US new regs for that. I need to confirm this because we found out today that I was correct the whole time. But don't quote me on that because we never know. But
that'd be great.
Things like the Jones Act, Puerto Rico has been asking for that. Guam has been asking for that for a while. Well, we need the assistance of our main advocates in the administration to get something moving. I'm not saying that we can get it done immediately, but get information out there, because educating, informing members of Congress, informing agencies in the executive branch is sometimes, it's very important. I know I've gone through that, where I had to talk to many members of Congress to make them understand. I spoke to Mr. King of Iowa for 6 months, trying to make him understand about the immigration program in the Marianas, why it's different from the nation. Cabotage. I wish I could just, I never could understand why Delta could fly from Narita to Saipan and back to Narita, and fly from Narita to Guam and back to Narita, and not be able to pick up passenger between Guam and Saipan. That's something that I'd really like to go in again and see if we could get that. It needs legislation, I would say. But those are policies that would help the territories a lot, and probably will be worth, if it works, worth more than the technical assistance money put together. Just give the territories the policy tools that they need to develop themselves and help themselves pick up And you know, because there's also a sense of pride in knowing that we did something that we helped ourselves into improving our economy, the lives of our community. In the cockfight, everybody went to bat on that one. We were not successful. I mean, I'm telling you, the vote was like, wow, 400 something to very little. But in 2014, I was able to take it out of the Farm Bill then. And it wasn't easy, you know, because Jim McGovern was a member of the committee, and I had to convince him that let it slide, and you know. But this time it was just a really difficult thing. I know in Puerto Rico, it's like $100 million a year industry. In the Marianas, I think you've got 90 license. In the Marianas, there's 3 licenses, one on Saipan, one on Tinian, and one on Rota. The amounts are very small, and I'm not sure about Guam. I know there's more Robusta, but yeah. Again, we're continuing to carry on our work on the Medicaid issue. We want to be, for the Marianas at least, have the 6-year program so that we could get our Medicaid office to put together the reporting eligibility, reporting system, electronic system, and the fraud system so that they meet all the requirements of getting into the full program. SSI and those kind of things for everybody, because we have it and the rest don't. But you know, please know that we work together, we work hard here, and we don't give up. If we get turned down today, we ask again yesterday. Again, thank you very much, governors, for coming. And I have to go through this script now, so please excuse me. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to this in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you.